Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, thanks for having me. Really pleased to be here at the first ThinkyCon. And my talk is actually maybe like a halfway point between two that I saw yesterday. Elliot Grant's about handmade puzzles, and Jonas Segri's about procedural ones. This is like about splitting the difference. I wanted to show you a bit about this game, Dear Reader, and how it works, and how we approach some of the design. Just to introduce myself, my name's Alexander King. I'm a game designer. I do commercial and artistic work, and I also teach some classes at Parsons and the NYU Game Center here in New York. Notice that there are a lot of people in the Thinky game dev community who are also academics. It's shocking. I know. So I teach part-time and also work as a systems designer. And I didn't always make games. I think this is common for a lot of you as well. I used to be an analyst, and I made things like this. This is an old reporting dashboard, and I loved spreadsheets. But being an analyst wasn't for me, and so then I became a game designer. So you'll see some influence of that later in the talk. And by the way, you can tell this is a vintage photo, not because the monitor in the picture is small, but because even an entry-level employee had a cubicle. So that's how you know this is in the olden days. Now it would be like an open floor plan or something. So I'm here to talk about a game that I've been had a chance to help work on for the past a long time, 5 or 6 years, called Dear Reader. So it's a word game, word puzzle game where we procedurally generate the puzzles on the fly using the text of classic literature. So one of the main conceits of the game is that there's a variety of different kinds of puzzles, all operating on the text of actual literature. And I'm going to show you more about how this works in a minute. And I'm one of the game designers, but a number of people worked on the game, so this isn't just me. Local Number 12, which was founded by Colleen Macklin, John Sharp, and Eric Zimmerman, and almost everybody on the team, I think, except for our developers, our programmers, is an academic in some form or fashion, and that gives us particular affordances, since this is a part-time project for everybody. So we're slower at doing everything, but gives us more time to kind of test and iterate and polish and things like that. So one thing I want to mention is Dear Reader is one of the launch titles in Apple Arcade back in fall of 2019, and it's been an Apple Arcade exclusive ever since. So if you're not familiar with Apple Arcade, then I'm contractually obligated to inform you that it's an amazing subscription service where you pay $4.99 a month for access to an amazing curated selection of games, which are free to subscribers, and so on and so forth. I bring it up because it's kind of like an odd thing having a game that's like done well in Apple Arcade, because you're trapped in this kind of walled garden. There's this walled garden called Apple Arcade, and if you're in the garden, it's great. Everyone's walking around, having a great time, playing your game. But if you're outside of the garden, then you can't see what's in there. It's just this wall, and you have no idea what's going on. So it's kind of a bummer, because it means that the game isn't particularly accessible. So because you can't just go and easily play it, but it has been beneficial because outside of the walled garden, it's it's tough for smaller devs on mobile. So maybe it's not so bad. But I bring that up because it makes it harder to kind of just go check out the game. And so if you haven't heard of it, that's probably why. But in that little walled garden, we've been hanging out for 5 years. We have a good sized player base. We've have players who've been playing it for years, and so I'm really proud of that. And it's been has enough of a player base that's been able to sustain our core team working on it, continuing development for almost 5 years now, on this kind of ongoing part-time basis. And also, it used to be called Lost Words, and we changed it right before we launched. So if you backed it on Kickstarter under a different name, that's why. And there's a really great talk from GDC 2019 by our lead designer Eric Zimmerman on the iteration process of when it was called Lost Words, that I recommend. Okay, so anyway, I want to talk about the main topic. This mixed approach that internally we started calling artisanal procedurality, maybe maybe as a joke, I think at first, and then it just sort of stuck. So here's my. I'm not really proposing this as like a real term, but just for purposes of discussion, this artisanal procedurality as sort of compromise or synergy. So the idea is that aspects of the game are handcrafted, and aspects of it are procedural. And I think this is like an interesting tension in a lot of games in this kind of space, right? Where on one hand, if it's handcrafted or artisanal, you have a lot of control. You can make sure all of the individual puzzles are high quality, but it takes a lot of work to do it, and it doesn't scale, right? And so if it's procedural, then it's you have this infinite amount of content, although it's like also labor intensive to make, just in a different way, and can often be sort of trickier. It's procedurality isn't a panacea. You can get infinite generation, but you can run into I've always liked Kate Compton calls the like infinite bowls of oatmeal problem, like that you're generating all the stuff that is technically unique, but indistinguishable from each other. So there's like all sorts of issues on both sides of this. Like I mentioned, the game uses the text of actual literature. So we're taking advantage of public domain books. We launched with like 50 books, and we have like 4 or 5 times as many that now. A lot of like greatest hits of the public domain, but also some like cool deep cuts and so on. And our art director John Sharp does all these very stylish covers in this cool mid-century modernist aesthetic. So the way that we turn a book into levels in Dear Reader isn't just cleaning the text file and dumping it in, because there's a real design challenge with using like real text as a basis for puzzles. The text has to be, well, so you do have to process it. You have to like remove all of the weird characters and standardize the em dashes and that sort of thing. I like got really good at regex over the course of this. This was like one of the first things that I was doing on Dear Reader was cleaning all of our text files so that they could be processed the same way in game. And I should mention, as I'm talking about this, sometimes people think that this is an educational game if I'm talking about it. And it's something a playtester said as well when we used Alice as the tutorial book. That used to be the first book that you would get. People would be like, "Oh, this is really fun," but like, so like this is like an educational game for kids, right? And would be like, "No, it's just it's just a regular game, just a game." So then, like, because books have such a strong cultural association with like learning, I guess, and like that, so that people think it's a learning kind of game to like help you read books or something like that. Which there's nothing wrong with that. But this is squarely like in the books are fun, just a game sort of thing. And we changed the tutorial book to Pride and Prejudice, and then people stopped thinking it was a educational game for kids, and instead they would think that they had come up with it themselves, and they would say, "Hey, you could sell this to kids to get them to read books." And we would say, "Oh wow, yeah, great idea." But kids don't have the $4.99 that pay for Apple Arcade, so I guess it wouldn't work. Anyway, so we were taking Alice, and we want to put this in game. So we've cleaned the text, and then we put it into this CMS system that we have for managing just this sort of thing, because we don't actually use the entirety of every book. It's too much text. So we have like our level design process is the person who's chapterizing the book is going through and taking out sort of snippets, which is its own a really difficult challenge, because not all text like plays well for puzzles. Like it lots of short snippets of dialogue like doesn't make for good puzzles. Each line is too short. Like paragraphs work better, and things like that. But this isn't like, this is real, like real text that has linguistic meaning. Like you can't just take what you want. Like it has to kind of, we still have to be getting the semblance of the book that you're reading. And so there's a real challenge with curating the text that we're using for puzzles. So now that we've done that, you're going to take the text, so like Pride and Prejudice, and when you play through it after it's completed this process, you are going to play through some puzzle using this text that is like scrambled it in some way. So the mode that is playing on the screen is one called swap, where it goes through and it switches the order of a bunch of words, and you're trying to reconstruct the original text. But it's not just a one kind of puzzle. Here's the exact same thing in Pride and Prejudice, but this time it's rearranged, which is flipping lines instead of words. And so we've got over 20 different kinds of puzzles like this. And so the puzzle then is getting generated on the fly, and the solution to every puzzle, though, is always the original text. Like you're always reconstructing the original text of the work. So English grammar is like a heuristic for solving these puzzles, but won't always help you, because authors break the rules of English grammar all the time. So in playing, you get to like have this weird word level perspective, or like bookworm level crawling through the text, and you get a feel for language in a way that's like really difficult to describe. As you're playing a particular author, you kind of get this sense for how they write, because you're always reconstructing the text. And so that's like the cool thing, right, is that this is totally procedural, that we are not handcrafting the puzzles. They're assembled 100% on the fly. So we can take the same portion of text, like this first part of Alice in Wonderland, and we have like a mode where different words are anagrammed, or one where you have to fill in part of a sentence, or one where you have to just find a certain word, or one where we've taken out lots of letters, and you have to assemble the letters, or one where it's sequence again, but it's you have to do it in the right order, or the swap, the one that I mentioned before, and so on and so forth. A whole bunch of these. And so when you open up a given book, it's randomly picking from these. So you're never going to get the same, as you play. You're going to see lots of different kinds of puzzles, and play through. Even the same text that you've played through is going to be different every time you play it, which is really funny. So when the game launched, the like Game Solver website started like a started posting guides for the game, which is like really amazing. But I feel really bad for whoever like like played through the game and then like transcribed the solutions to playing the first level of Flatland, one of the books in the game. But like, yes, oh sorry, it's like it's not going to be this way literally the next time that you play. Like, so it's like useless as a walkthrough. So we can have different puzzles on the same text, and we can have the same puzzle with the same text, but we can also change the difficulty, because as soon as something is procedural, right, that you have all of these parameters, and those parameters you can adjust. So one thing that we want is, over the course of a chapter, we want to have a difficulty ramp, so that like gets more difficult as you play, and it wouldn't be really possible to do that by hand, and certainly not with the volume of text that we have, and the number of puzzles. You can't handcraft it all, but it also can't be completely random. We did try like all sorts of things that were like fully procedural and things like that, but it was really difficult to balance. So that's our artisanal procedurality, and I'm using this difficulty, kind of player difficulty, as the example case for you. So on the elements of difficulty that are artisanal is the fact that we are curating the books. For launch we had a dedicated curator, a woman named Mehek Khan, and since then somebody on the team, Karina Pop, like or the main contribution that she's doing is finding books and making sure we're having a diverse selection of authors and things like that. All sorts of cool things. So the like we're picking what books there are. It's not random or just surfacing random text. And then, like I mentioned, we're also curating the text of the chapters themselves, and paying a lot of attention to that. So there's a lot of handcrafting elements to make sure that like the substratum that the procedure is running on is well equipped for it. And then the puzzles themselves are like hand designed, like in the sense that we're not randomly generating the design of the puzzles. Like they were literally handcrafted, like a lot of these by playing different with different mechanics that use words and things like that. So we're like we have a finite number of puzzles, I guess, and that they were doing. And the other things that we're proceduralizing are that difficulty ramp that I mentioned. That we want the first page to be easier than the last page of a chapter. We want it to get harder over time, and it seems like we should do that like the way that happens is procedural, but we define in actually a lot of detail like how that actually happens. So this is one of our backend spreadsheets for a given mode. It's like we have all of these different levels of difficulty that have different start endpoints, and for every single puzzle type, we have to like hand specify like what is an easy swap. An easy swap is it swaps 4 words, and like a really difficult one is it swaps 10 words. Like all of this was discovered through a lot of playtesting and iteration, like finding what's too difficult, so all of the bounds of these parameters have to be kind of like tuned to find the bounds of the procedure. A lot of these are just sort of traditional hand-designed gameplay elements, but like I said, you can't do everything that way. So the breakpoints of the puzzles are handcrafted, but what we didn't do is craft like what words get picked. So instead, we have a procedure that crawls through the text and is just making these choices on what to swap. It is like so much more involved than you might think to do these kinds of puzzles. Like one of it's like no one's ever going to clone Dear Reader because of the amount of labor that it takes to like, you have no idea the number of like, the one where we're pulling out letters will like, or the word swap. If you swap I with I, like the same word twice, well, that's pretty hard to solve. Kind of like, so there's each puzzle mode has a litany of rules behind it that's making sure that the thing that it's doing to screw up the text will then actually be solvable afterwards. And then that difficulty ramp that I mentioned was, we also want, now that we have all of these levers, we want these kind of interesting ramps. And so we have like a formula that is determining, given the amount of text that we have and so on and so forth, how all of those parameters should be tuned so that we're getting the kind of cadence that we want. I have this twice. And then the other procedural element is like, now that we have these parameters, is we can do things like we could have a twist, is what we call is like our boss mode, a sort of thing that has we can now like combine puzzles, since we're running the puzzles on the fly. Like we can do all sorts of weird stuff. We can make you play a different puzzle every single page or something like that, or other weird things like having to play the pages in reverse order, and things like that. So these are like the bosses sort of the game, but they're procedural bosses, and these two have their own spreadsheet of all of their difficulty ramps and things like that. The twist design has this kind of procedural element. This is part of the spreadsheet that details how twists work, and all the different things, like how the difficulty should be tuned. If it's going to mix different modes, how many modes is it going to mix, and things like that. So again, the like, I guess this maybe is the, I would, maybe this should be an artisanal, but the way that this is affects the gameplay is totally procedural. And then I mean, I guess that there are aspects of the game that are neither, as they relate to difficulty. Like the books themselves have intrinsic difficulty. Like Sappho's poems are just more difficult because the language can be antiquated in its poetry. Poems in general tend to be more difficult, and so we have like a difficulty that we determine, that when we put the books in the game, we classify them based on our sense, and then actually later go and adjust if we find that we kind of got it wrong, something being easier than we thought or harder than we thought. And then we also allow the players to select difficulty. This came out of like literally years of play testing. Some players found that time pressure just ruined the game for them and makes it too stressful. And other people thought without a ticking clock, like you could just take as long as you want to solve it. There's no pressure whatsoever. And so they weren't interested in playing, which is a really funny, we ultimately decided on like the worst solution to that problem, which is just you can pick it. So we have different kind of like player selected modes, so that if you are really turned off by time pressure, you don't have to have it. So in this way, we're able to have kind of a difficulty ramp across the experience, but that we've tightly bound with all these handcrafted elements. And there's like, it's like we ended up with, there's too much that you could handcraft, but it was so specific that it couldn't be entirely procedural. So this again showing the the text that we're using. We can run all these cool puzzles on it. We can do it on the fly and all this stuff. But getting to where this is just playable and we could just do this, there's like a lot of handcrafted elements that are in the wings, bounding this kind of procedural aspect of it. But in mixing them, I think you can kind of get this sort of like a best of both worlds a sort of thing, where you're like the procedure, has all these benefits, but we've like set the exact structure that it's going to be doing it by. And then I guess I haven't mentioned, but like the game has all the like the usual stuff you would expect in a kind of a game that you play on your foot. Like we have a daily challenge and stuff like that this also helps support. So like I do think it's an interesting case working on Dear Reader, and that like a lot of game design is figuring out how to solve particular problems. And so like this of trying to turn this text into like the text of public domain literature and turning it into puzzles is like, it's pretty specific to Dear Reader. It's not like there's not like a big genre, like it's not like a Sokoban game or something like that. This isn't a genre of puzzle types necessarily, but the kind of this idea of that you don't have to just be like, oh, in my game we're doing procedural puzzles. That's what it's about, an infinite number of puzzles, and we're kind of committing to that. Or no, we're going to handcraft everything, and everything's going to be better because it's handcrafted. You can kind of like have it both ways, and take aspects of both of those into account when designing certain things. So that's my like the takeaway from this. So not that you should use public domain. Oh, public domain is great. Big supporter of the Creative Commons and all. You should do that, but you should do this is proceduralize aspects of your handcrafted puzzles. That like by taking something, if you have this kind of puzzle type, you have this form of puzzle, by having some aspects of it have parameters, that then you can do all this cool stuff on the fly. You can do your ramping and all this stuff. So I'm a big fan of procedural puzzles in general. But I also think that handcrafting your procedures is also like constraining the bounds of the procedural generation, and like you're taking, instead of this like, oh, it's this infinite number of puzzles, it's tightly bounded within this kind of domain that you want. And I think this is a good general case lesson, even if the specifics of Dear Reader aren't are the kind of puzzles that we make aren't universally relevant. I think this idea of like taking the best of both worlds here, I think is something I want to share. So yeah, that's my pitch on artisanal procedurality, and I'd love to take some questions, and afterwards I'll be on the Discord as well.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. It's great to see a game being represented in these talks that is like so different and unique in like the game that it is. In fact, there was a question about, like along those lines in the chat from Plush Lola. Plush Lola's had a lot of great questions over the last few days. And they're just wondering about the original concept for this idea. Where did you start?
Yeah, so when I joined the project, it was a multiplayer game, and so yeah, it's funny. In the original conception, you created the puzzle, basically. Like, you would do the switching, like I would swap the words or whatever the different modes were, and then I would send it to another player, and they would. But it was like, it's just immediately there were so many problems with this. So you would get these random puzzles that were created by other people, and they would vary wildly in difficulty. Like, it'd be like, oh, this was really fun, and then I'd get one that like Eric had designed, and it'd be impossible, and it was just like, and so then we gradually removed the player to player element, and then that's where we started doing this. Oh, like, what if we designed them using like procedure? So like we kind of like we went through how we were designing them, and then kind of just automated that, and so that's kind of how it got there.
I bet when it was multiplayer, I bet people were really cheeky and were just like swapping words around just be really difficult to figure out.
All the things that those things that we discovered were because of things that we had noticed and exactly it totally didn't work. But that was the origin, was this like finding words within words, and then kind of building from there.
Cool, thank you. So I also had a question.
Yeah, please.
And maybe you touched on this. I was doing other things while you were talking and listening at the same time. But I was wondering.
I won't be. I'm not insulted. That's fine. I know you're busy.
Gotta run the stream.
Of course.
So I was wondering. So when you're, swapping words around, were there situations, or did you encounter unexpected situations where you there were like grammatically correct ways of like moving the words around, swapping them, and they would be grammatically correct? And maybe even I was thinking like the situation where somebody says the door and the window or something, and like you could easily write the same thing, the window and the door, and it would mean the same thing. Did you come across those kinds of situations?
Yes, how did you deal with it? And so there are a lot, and again, this depends on the kind of the mode. Like some of the ones that are spelling related, like where we're removing letters, have like a totally different kind of set of things. But yeah, exactly what you describe, and we would early on get and occasionally still get like a player will kind of report a bug and say like, oh, like this should be how the sentence is, and we just feel like, well, sorry, like that's not how Jane Austen wrote it. So that's not, and that I think we onboard players enough to that like the solution is always the actual text. It gets you to this point where it is sort of like maddening when you read the scrambled text and it is grammatical, and you're like, oh, all right, well then, like, how is she, like what's she up to here? Like, what the words are got to be in a different order or something like that, and that's part of the fun. Is like you're playing with language in that way.
Absolutely. Did you consider, like, it's making me actually think of like in Return of the Obra Dinn, you have to insert words as your answers, and there are some situations in that game where it'll allow multiple answers and will accept any of them. I guess in your case it's different though, because you have like a source material that
Yeah,
has
so we try, there's a lot of rules to avoid like things where there could be a multiple. So like when we do things switching or whatever, the words that we're removing,
Yeah.
we'll avoid where there could be a real ambiguity
Okay.
about that as a result.
Awesome, thank you. We probably should wrap up. I'll ask this one last question. Okay, so follow-up question from Plushlola. Do you know about, because you said you joined the project and it was a multiplayer game. Do you know the origins for the original
Yes.
theme?
Yeah. And the talk that I mentioned, so 100 versions of Lost Words, goes over the original version it was originally going to be a Twitter game that was like you would tweet and take out the letter, but it was this idea of like, oh, within the word designing is the word sign, like and like that mechanic, and it was like, how do we, and then the impetus from there was making a new mechanic. Like the idea was Eric, Colleen, and John really wanted to make like a new kind of puzzle, like, and so that's why there was this really long kind of playtesting stage. So when I had joined, it had been kickstarted and had this whole multiplayer sort of mechanic, and then it was another 2 years of playtesting that to get to smooth off the edges there, even I mean getting so many of the mechanics, like how it scores and things like that, were really, really difficult. A colleague, I still remember her. I'll never forget the playtesting feedback that was like, you are wandering in the desert, you found a local maximum, but it's not good, and this game will never be good. It's like, and I urge you to abandon this entire project. And it was like, because it was just not fun. Like it was like, and then. But then, like, I don't know, a couple months after that, we finally made it fun.
You figured it out.
Yeah.
They were wrong ultimately.
well, I think it was good advice, but we lucked. I think we lucked into a fun, like, but it goes to show how much those parameters that I'm talking about, that kind of tuning, can really mean the difference between like this game is just like they'd play it for 5 minutes and be like, okay, cool, thanks, versus they'd play it and wouldn't give the phone back, like they would just keep playing it. It was a difference of such fine degrees that it's really incredible.
That's fascinating. All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.